Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody, where we take your requests and really get into the nitty-gritty of, well, whatever you guys are curious about. And this time around, you wanted to know more about Two Broke Girls, huh? So we've got a whole stack of sources here, Wikipedia, WikiOne, Rotten Tomatoes. Even the show's official pages looks like someone was doing their homework.
Yeah, looks like it.
So I guess the big question is, what made this show tick, right? What's the story behind the story?
Well, Two Broke Girls ran on CBS, prime time, for 6 seasons from 2011 to 2017, created by Michael Patrick King, who you might know from Sex and the City, and Whitney Cummings, the comedian.
Oh, yeah, I know her stand-up.
Right, so the show is set in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and it follows these two waitresses, Max Black and Caroline Channing.
Total opposites, right? I mean, talk about a culture clash. Max, played by Kat Dennings, just brilliant. She's this tough girl, grew up with something super street smart, kind of jaded by life. And then there's Caroline, played by Beth Burrs, who is like, misprivileged billionaire's daughter until her dad's whole empire goes bust, Ponzi scheme, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, pretty much overnight, her life flips completely upside down, and she finds herself waitressing alongside Max at this greasy spoon diner.
Not exactly the life she was used to, huh?
Nope, not at all. But somehow, despite all their differences, coming from these completely different worlds, they kind of find common ground in their shared, lack of money.
The broke part of Two Broke Girls.
Exactly. And what really gets them going is this ambition, this dream of starting their own cupcake business.
And so that was your mission for this deep dive, right? To figure out what Two Broke Girls was all about.
Yeah, I wanted to see what made it work. It would explore everything from like the initial concept and the characters, those personalities, to how the critics saw it and what was happening behind the scenes. I can give you the complete picture.
So let's start with that basic premise, right? Two women from opposite sides of the tracks and how their personalities played into that whole dynamic.
Well, the core idea was this unlikely pairing brought together by circumstance, right? And what's really interesting is how the show plays with this classic American dream trope, but then kind of twists it by throwing all these obstacles in their way as they're trying to make their business work, almost like reflecting, real-life economic anxieties that people were facing during that time.
Yeah, it's not always easy to get ahead.
And the driving force behind all of that is the relationship between Max and Caroline.
I mean, Kat Dennings as Max is just spot on. You totally believe her as this tough-talking, working-class woman who's seen it all, her humor, so dry and sarcastic you can't help but laugh. And then she's also the one who actually knows how to bake, which is like the whole foundation for their cupcake dream.
Right, and Beth Burrs as Caroline brings this relentless optimism even after losing everything. She's a Wharton graduate, so she's got the business smarts, but she's also hilariously clueless about their new reality, the whole struggling waitress thing.
Yeah, that clash between Max's practicality and Caroline's kind of naive enthusiasm, that's where a lot of the comedy comes from, but it also fuels their ambition.
Exactly. They balance each other out in a way.
But they're not alone in this, right? The Williamsburg Diner is full of these crazy characters. Who else do we have?
Well, there's Han Lee, the diner owner, played by Matthew Malloy.
Right.
He's Korean, and a lot of the jokes surrounding him kind of play on his height and, some cultural misunderstandings.
Which some people found funny, but others thought it was a little stereotypical, right?
Yeah, that became a point of contention for some viewers. They felt it was relying on tired tropes.
Then we have Oleg the cook, played by Jonathan Kite. He's the one who's always making these over-the-top, sometimes inappropriate jokes.
Yeah.
Mostly aimed at Max and Caroline.
Oh, yeah. Oleg. He's definitely a character. The show often plays his jokes for laughs, with Max usually hitting back with a sarcastic remark.
And then there's Earl the cashier, played by Garrett Morris, the veteran actor.
Yeah, he's the elderly African-American cashier, ex-jazz musician, very laid back, kind of a mentor figure to Max. It's interesting because later in this series, there are hints that Earl's may be experiencing some memory problems.
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's subtle. Not a major plot point, but it adds a layer of depth to his character.
Oh, that's interesting. And of course, we can't forget Sophie Katiski, the upstairs neighbor, played by Jennifer Coolidge.
Oh, Sophie, she's iconic, right? Larger than life, Polish immigrant, runs a cleaning company, and absolutely no filter.
Hilarious, though. I mean, she loves Max, clearly favors her over Caroline, who she's always teasing.
Yeah, she definitely has her favorites, but she's also crucial to their business. Becoming an early investor kind of shows you never know where support's going to come from.
Right place, right time. So we've got this core group now. Let's talk about their journey to actually launch this cupcake business. They set this huge goal, right? $250,000. It felt like a running gag almost.
Yeah, it did. From the very beginning, they had this ambitious target. And it was both a motivator,
Mm.
something to strive for, but also this constant reminder of how broke they really were.
The show even had that counter at the end of each episode in the earlier seasons showing their progress or lack thereof.
A very visual representation of their struggle.
They did get a big boost early on, though, thanks to Sophie.
Yeah, in season 2, Sophie surprisingly lends them $20,000.
Out of the blue.
Pretty much. I think she just liked Max that much, but it allowed them to finally open their first cupcake shop.
Which, of course, being a sitcom, doesn't go smoothly.
Oh no, it's almost tragicomic. They get so close and then it all falls apart. The business fails.
Yeah.
They have to close shop, and after paying Sophie back, they're basically back where they started.
Ouch, that's gonna hurt, but they don't give up, right?
Nope, they're resilient. In season 3, they downsize and start running their cupcake business out of the back of the diner using a walk-up window, showing their adaptability, making the best of a bad situation.
And that's when they decide to level up their skills, right? Max goes to pastry school.
That's right. Manhattan School of Pastry Max enrolls, and Caroline ends up working there too, which leads to some new relationships and, of course, complications.
Because what's a sitcom without a little romance drama?
Exactly. So Max starts dating a fellow student, Deke, and Caroline gets involved with her married French instructor, Nicholas, which is a whole mess, and eventually leads to the pastry school shutting down.
Yeah.
It all gets pretty tangled up, personal lives and ambitions clashing.
Wasn't there a moment where they tried to save the school themselves?
Briefly, yeah, Max, Caroline, and Deke explore the idea of getting Deke's wealthy parents to invest, but it's another one of those almost but not quite moments for them.
Yeah, they're always so close.
And by season 4, they finally get their cupcake business going again, this time with a dedicated space.
Yeah.
But they're still haunted by money problems.
It never seems to go away, does it?
Nope, they have a short period of success, but then it's back to financial struggles. They even end up working at a high-end pastry shop called The High just to make ends meet and pay off debts.
The broke life just keeps pulling them back in.
It's a recurring thing for sure.
And then season 5 rolls around, and Caroline has this big opportunity. She sells her life story.
Yeah, for a whopping $250,000. She uses her unique experiences to cash in, but instead of just keeping the money, she reinvests most of it back into their business. They expand into a dessert bar, taking over the pizza place next door.
Smart move.
And she even buys a share of the diner, helping Han out with his own financial issues. It seems like they might finally be on stable ground.
Finally right.
But while Caroline's off in Hollywood working on a movie adaptation, Max finds love back in New York with Randy, this successful lawyer.
Long distance, huh? That's tough.
It is, and they try to make it work, but ultimately Max realizes her life is with Caroline in New York.
Makes sense, they're like family at this point.
Exactly, and season 6 brings a whole new dynamic with Sophie and Oleg becoming parents. Their daughter Barbara's born. It's a big change for them.
Yeah, babies change everything. And Caroline finds a new love interest too, right?
Yeah, a contractor named Bobby who helps rebuild their dessert bar after it gets damaged in a storm.
So things are looking up, right? Business is going well. New relationships blooming.
It seems like it. But then, in true to broke girl's fashion disaster strikes, Caroline accidentally ruins a super expensive dress she borrowed for the premiere of her movie, wiping out their savings and landing them right back where they started broke.
Oh no, not again. It's like a cruel joke.
It is. But the finale does offer some hope for Max. At least Randy comes back to New York and proposes, and she says yes.
A happy ending for Max.
Yeah, but the show ends there because it got canceled by CBS. So we never really see what happens with everyone else, which is kind of a bummer, after investing 6 seasons in these characters.
It's always frustrating when a show ends abruptly, like that. No real closure for the other storylines, but hey, at least Max found her happily ever after.
Let's talk more about those key relationships, though. I mean, the friendship between Max and Caroline, that's the heart of the show, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Their dynamic makes the show, even with their completely different backgrounds and personalities. Max with her cynicism and street smarts, and Caroline with her optimism and business savvy. Their bond is what holds everything together. Max keeps Caroline grounded in reality, and Caroline pushes Max to dream bigger. Their differences create a lot of the humor, but their unwavering support for each other, that's the emotional core.
They've got each other's backs no matter what.
Yeah.
And beyond that central friendship, romantic relationships played a huge role in their journeys, too. Max had a few notable love interests, right?
Yeah, from Johnny in the early seasons to Deke during pastry school and ultimately Randy. These relationships showed different sides of Max and how her views on love and commitment evolved. Each one had its challenges and contributed to her growth, even the ones that ended badly. Heartbreak is part of life, I guess.
Unfortunately. And Caroline's love life was pretty eventful, too, with Candy. Andy, the whole Nicholas debacle,
Yeah.
and then Bobby, it's like her relationships mirrored her own journey of trying to redefine herself and find happiness after losing her fortune.
Trying to figure out who she is now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's Oleg and Sophie. Their relationship is this crazy whirlwind, starts as pure physical attraction, but somehow morphs into this surprisingly committed relationship. They get married, have a baby. It's totally unpredictable. And a big source of the show is more outlandish humor.
It's definitely a wild ride with those two. Okay, so we've talked about the characters and their relationships. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the making of the show itself. We know Michael Patrick King and Whitney Cummings created it. What else stands out about the production?
Well, it premiered on CBS in September 2011, ran for 6 seasons, 138 episodes total, filmed in front of a live studio audience, which gave it that classic sitcom energy. The laughter, the reactions.
I always wonder how actors stay focused with all that going on.
Right? It must be a different kind of energy, but it definitely adds to the feel of the show.
The show moved around the schedule quite a bit too, right?
Yeah, initially it had this great slot after 2.5 Men, which was huge at the time, so it got a huge built-in audience. But over the years, it bounced around different nights, different time slots, which can affect viewership. People lose track of it.
It's hard to keep up sometimes. And then the cancellation after 6 seasons seemed pretty sudden.
It did, from what the sources say. CBS wanted a bigger ownership stake in the show, which the producers weren't keen on, and the ratings have been declining. Plus, the network was looking to bring in new comedy, so it all kind of culminated in the decision to end it.
Makes sense from a business perspective, but still disappointing for the fans. And because nobody expected it, the finale didn't really wrap things up neatly, did it?
No, it left a lot of loose ends, which can be frustrating for viewers who had been following the characters for so long.
You want to see them get their happy ending, Okay, so let's move on to the critical reception of Two Broke Girls. It seems like it wasn't exactly a critical darling.
Not really. Critics were pretty divided on it.
Yeah.
Some liked it, some really didn't.
So what did the critics say?
Well, everyone seemed to agree that Kat Dennings and Beth Behrs had great chemistry. Their performances were strong. But a lot of the criticism targeted the humor.
Too raunchy.
That was part of it. Some found it crude. But the bigger issue for many was the reliance on stereotypes, especially about race, ethnicity, and sexuality.
The portrayal of Han Lee was a big one, right?
Yeah, he was often seen as a very stereotypical representation of an Asian man, which drew a lot of criticism. And there were also jokes that some considered insensitive, including what some perceived as rape jokes early on and the way Orthodox Jews were portrayed. It all pointed to a disconnect between the show's humor and evolving cultural sensitivities.
Times change, right? What was acceptable back then might not fly now.
Exactly, and some critics were very vocal about their disapproval. There's a review from a New Zealand paper that called Two Broke Girls the worst new show of 2012, specifically because of those early rape jokes. And Emily Nussbaum from The New Yorker, she called the supporting characters so racist, it is less offensive than baffling. But she also acknowledged the potential of this show. With the right tweaks, it could be something special.
So mixed bag, critically speaking.
Yeah, some critics focused on the positive aspects, like the energy between Dennings and Behrs, the snappy dialogue, classic sitcom stuff. But overall, the negative reviews seemed to outweigh the positive ones, and Two Broke Girls even landed on a few worst of the year lists during its run.
Ouch, not a good look. But hey, critical acclaim doesn't always equal popularity with audiences. The show premiered with huge numbers, right?
Massive. The series premiere drew over 19 million viewers, making it the highest-rated fall premiere for a comedy in over a decade. It was a big hit, especially with college students and young men, and when you factored in DVR views, those numbers were even higher.
So it definitely struck a chord with a lot of people, but did those numbers stay strong?
Like most shows, it saw a gradual decline in viewership over the seasons, which is pretty typical. People's tastes change, new shows come along. But those initial numbers show it had a strong appeal early on.
And it wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon either, right? It was pretty popular internationally.
Yeah, it aired in tons of countries. Canada, the U.K., Ireland, India, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, you name it. It found a global audience.
It must be interesting to see how different cultures react to the same jokes.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who loved the show and wanted to rewatch it, there were DVD releases for all 6 seasons.
All 6? That's a lot of DVDs.
It is. The first season was the only one to get a Blu-ray release, though. At least in the Canada and Australia, the DVDs usually had bonus features, behind-the-scenes stuff, unaired scenes, gag reels, the usual. And in the UK and Australia, they even released these multi-season DVD sets for the diehard fans.
The complete collection. It's like owning a piece of TV history. And I remember Two Broke Girls had some pretty big names guest starring on the show, too.
Oh, yeah, they had some notable guest appearances.
Mm.
Martha Stewart, Kip Kardashian, Lindsay Lohan, even RuPaul out of drag.
Yeah.
It added a bit of star power to certain episodes.
Always fun to spot those familiar faces. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Two Broke Girls, what are the big takeaways? What should our listeners remember?
I think the main thing is Two Broke Girls was this show that really resonated with a lot of people. The premise of these two unlikely friends struggling financially but chasing their dreams together, that was relatable, and the chemistry between Kat Dennings and Beth Behrs was undeniable.
Mm.
But the show also faced a lot of criticism for its humor, which raises some interesting questions about how comedy has evolved and what's considered acceptable, the whole issue of stereotypes and representation.
It's a delicate balance, right? Finding the humor without being offensive.
Yeah, and despite the mixed reception critically, Two Broke Girls was initially a huge success ratings-wise, but it ended somewhat abruptly, leaving some storylines unresolved, which makes you wonder what could have been.
Yeah, it's always fun to speculate what might have happened if the show had continued. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, from the show's origins to its controversial elements to its enduring popularity with certain audiences.
Absolutely. It's a show that sparked a lot of different reactions. And this brings me to a final thought for our listeners. Given how popular Two Broke Girls was and how much people connected with Max and Caroline, what kind of stories could they have told if the show had gotten a proper final season to wrap things up? And what does the show's critical reception, particularly the criticism of its humor, say about how comedy and representation on TV have shifted since the show first aired? Something to ponder.
Food for thought, folks. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.